Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You can't see, but we have a room full of eager book readers here, who are just they can't wait to dive in. So I don't know if you're going to be able to hear, but everyone holler. Not sure how much of that came through, but there was a big cheer for you.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Alrighty, so just before we hit it off, I just want to start with our acknowledgement of country. We are so blessed to be able to come here, to learn here and live here. So I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, this space where we are meeting this evening. The Menang people have been here on this Noongar Budja for thousands of years. The connection they share with this place we call the Great Southern runs generations deep. It is with respect that I acknowledge the Menang people and their elders, past, present, and emerging. It is a privilege to be here, to live here, and to learn here. Thank you all for coming this evening. And thank you, Amy.
Thank you for having me. I should also acknowledge that I am on Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, so I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people. Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, let's dive right in. We always like to start with hearing a little bit about your background, how you came to be a reader, whether you're as much a reader as a writer, what were you like as a child, what were your childhood favourites, all of that kind of stuff.
I was definitely a bookish child. I was very shy. I was an only child of two English teacher parents, so there were a lot of books in the house. There's a lot of reading and a lot of kind of making up stories and games. And I think, yeah, as long as I can remember, I've adored books and stories. When I was little, I was one of those kids who was obsessed with horses. So I read a lot of pony books as a child, and in fact went on to write a series of horse books when I was in my 20s. Started as a kind of a joke because a friend of mine knew that was my childhood obsession and had given me a copy of the Black Stallion for my 23rd birthday or something. I'm like, I'm going to have a go at writing these because I loved them so much as a kid. But I also, I guess, had quite eclectic taste. I liked a lot of New Zealand writers because I grew up in Aotearoa, and classics as well. And having a 7-year-old myself now, it's quite nice to be revisiting some of my favourites from when I was younger, and yeah, and watching him enjoying them as well. So yeah, definitely bookish and quiet, and a great lover of reading, and which I still am.
It's absolutely lovely being able to revisit those. I don't have any children myself, but I have a 4-year-old niece and a 6-year-old nephew, and it's the bee's knees getting to see it through their eyes again.
Absolutely.
And when did you start to transition from being a reader to also being a writer, and maybe a little bit about your academic background?
Sure. So probably at high school, I started to love writing. Was probably earlier than that too, but I have a memory of being in what would the equivalent be? It was in fourth form, which would be like maybe grade 9 over here, year 9, and I'd written this story, quite a weird story about a volunteer firefighter who becomes an arsonist, something strange like that. But I submitted it to a competition with my teachers' kind of encouragement, and it got published, and that kind of sparked something in me that made me think maybe I could do this as well as reading, and because it had always been a passion to try, you know, to have a go at writing stories and to tell stories. So that was maybe the very first spark of trying to do it myself. And then after high school, I went to university in Wellington and did a Bachelor of Arts, and then discovered that I didn't just have to do English and philosophy. There were also creative writing subjects as well, and it's a really good program there. So I started first with some poetry subjects and then short fiction, and just adored it and went from there, and was lucky to be part of a really kind of rich and supportive community of writers in Wellington too. So that was part of it. I think it was not just the writing, but the friendships and the kind of camaraderie around it as well. So it started pretty early, and I've just been really fortunate to have good people around me to keep encouraging me. I know that after I kind of finished studying, I'd done a Master of Arts in Creative Writing and was sort of just working for a year just to try and figure out what to do with myself. There was a really nice writer's studio with some others who had finished, and that helped me keep going. And then, of course, I moved to Melbourne to do a PhD in creative writing at Melbourne University, and was lucky to find another community here, bigger and sort of more diverse, I guess, and dispersed, but still really vibrant and exciting. And I still benefit from that today. So, yeah.
Excellent. And do you get to get back home pretty often?
I try to, yeah. It's, I mean, now that we're not in a pandemic and the borders are open, it's not that far. It was only then when the borders were closed that it felt far. So it's, just a short plane right away. So I try to get back a couple of times a year.
Oh, that's lovely. I love New Zealand. I need to go back. And I've just spotted out of the corner of my eye, because we've got basically you on a massive screen TV so that everyone can see, and I'm sort of to the side, you can see me. And who's our friend in the background there?
That's Zelda. She looks like a statue, but she is alive. Probably come and walk in front of the camera if we give her half the chance. She likes Zoom for some reason.
Oh, is she a Zoom baby? How old is she?
She's 4 years old. Nearly 5 years old. She was a pandemic kitten. Yeah. Well, no, maybe she's that's no, she's
That's why she loves
lovely.
Zoom.
Writing buddy as well. She likes it when the computer's out, and helps me stay put while I'm writing.
Is her home on your lap or on the keyboard?
A bit of both. I mean, I try to encourage the lap, obviously, or next to the keyboard, but it depends how kind of collaborative she's feeling.
Yes. Sometimes she's deciding that she's taking control and it's time for you to take a creative backseat.
There we go. We've been. Here she comes. Yeah, you probably see it.
She's like, "You're talking about me?"
Yeah, exactly.
Oh. So what are you and Zelda currently reading at the moment?
Zelda and I are currently reading, she does that as well. She gets in the way of the book, like scratches on the corner of it. We're currently reading Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood, which I'm about halfway through, and I'm absolutely immersed in and loving. So that's a treat at the moment that I'm looking forward to getting back to. I really enjoyed the weekend as well, and so this is quite different. It's wonderful to get into it. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had one of our local book clubs, not this one, but one of our local book clubs pick that. I know, so I'm waiting for them to read it so I can hear all about it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't finished yet, but what I can say so far is that it's wonderfully kind of atmospheric and has this really subtle tension to it that I really like. And I don't know if it's a subgenre, but something about fiction involving nuns and monasteries and convents and things I find really fascinating. So this is definitely ticking that box.
Excellent. It's always good when you find like a sort of topic that you enjoy. For me, if it's got a strong ocean presence,
yes,
I'm gonna
great.
like it. Yeah, I always love it when they have that incorporated. And do you have any favorite authors? Any ones that are just comfort you go back to all the time?
So many. What do I choose? I don't want to don't hold me to this being the only one, but recently I've been on a real sort of binge of reading Lauren Groff, the American writer. So I read Matrix, again, a kind of monastery or nun novel, I suppose, and then The Vaster Wilds over the summer, and also my goodness, my brain, what's it called? The one set in the Colton America from the 70s to 2000s. Oh my goodness, I'm having a brain freeze. Can't remember the title
The
of
Matrix and The Vaster Wilds were the two that I remembered as well.
Yeah, Matrix, Vaster Wilds, and it'll come to me. But yeah, reading them back to back was fascinating because they were all, I mean, there was clearly the same mind behind them, but they were completely different in terms of setting and era and even style, but somehow unified. And so I really enjoyed immersing myself in those.
I loved The Matrix. It was very I'm trying to think of a more intelligent way to say badass, but I can't think of one. So it was very badass. These
Yeah, I
nuns,
get what you
nuns.
mean.
They had a little nun empire. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It was gangster, Cheryl would have
I just
said.
sorry to interrupt. I just remember what it was called, Arcadia. So if anyone's interested, Arcadia, it's also very good.
And how do you find balancing being a reader and writing your own works? Do you ever find that you have to take a break from reading or read nonfiction while you write, or does it not impact you too much?
It might be that I just have no sort of impulse control, but I couldn't imagine not reading, you know. So no, I don't stop reading, or at least I haven't yet. And I find I might be a bit more kind of careful about what I'm reading. Like I might think I sort of prescribe things for myself that I need kind of help with or ideas about, or that feels like they're kind of akin to what I'm writing, but not completely sort of on the nose. But I do also like having nonfiction on the go, to like primary sources to feed into the fiction. I think that's something I'm beginning to notice that I really appreciate as a writer, to have that kind of
Yeah.
element of research and to give a kind of texture to my own writing. So yeah, I have never stopped reading and can't imagine it, but I like to have a bit of a balance.
Yes, I know what you mean. It'd be torture, honestly.
Yeah.
And do you have any writing rituals that go with that process for you?
Oh, I wish I did, but to be absolutely honest, I'm just so time poor. I don't think it's a ritual, but I just sort of greedily grab time whenever I can. And in a way, it's a sort of blessing, because I think I use it better than I did back when I was younger and I had more time, when I probably would have imposed rituals or needed kind of, yeah, routines or superstitious things to get me started. Whenever I've got like a spare hour or so, I'm just like, right, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna try and get into this and use it. And yes, it's just balancing work and parenting and writing and whatever else is going on. So I suppose one thing I did with my brilliant sister, and I'm sort of tentatively starting to do with the next project, is I had kind of a messy poster, or sort of, visualize, something I could write on and draw on, for as a kind of map, I suppose, for the structuring of the novel and for ideas. I sort of don't want to say mood board, but something along those lines. So having something visual near the desk that I can look back at helps me, I think.
Yeah, I think I'd need that as well. A vibe. One of our publishers, they do something called vibe sheets,
Mm.
which I actually love. They present them when we're doing the buying, and so they'll have it's Ultimo Press that does them.
Oh, cool.
Have like songs or that feel like the book and things like that. So whoever does those at Ultimo Press, I love them.
Great idea. Yeah, I'm a big fan of a playlist as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
How are you with silence? I'm terrible with it.
I don't know. Yeah, at times it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I suppose being a parent, sometimes it'd be a nice
I think
change.
it's just mm, indeed.
And bit nosy, but do you guys live like right in the city? Are you sort of in house, apartment? What's the layout?
Yeah, we're lucky. We're in Brunswick and sort of inner North Melbourne, and yeah, got a house, a little garden, and like, so when I was writing My Brilliant Sister, we're in a different place, more of an apartment townhouse type situation with a lot less space, and um, so having a room to write in now is a bit of a game changer. In fact, I'm kind of sort of jealously protected. I don't want to do any of my, because I'm a teacher as well. I don't like to do schoolwork in there
Yeah.
particularly. If I take a pile of marking in, I'm much more likely to kind of ignore it and try to move back to whatever writing I want to be doing instead. So yeah, I've got a little bit more space now, which is really nice.
Yeah. That's good because then that space can inspire you, sort of thing.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think, yeah, when I was writing My Brilliant Sister, I was teaching, not My Brilliant Career, actually, that was fictionalized, but I was teaching Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. And I think a lot of the ideas in that essay about, the shape of a life shaping a work, and, the physical and kind of material conditions of the writer's life affecting what they produce, that was at the front of my mind. And I think it's absolutely true. And it's not to say that you can't write at a kitchen table or whatever, but it just changes the shape of what you put out into the world, which isn't to say it's less valid, it's just different. So.
Yeah, beautiful. And I suppose it's almost a chicken and the egg sort of question, but you were saying you were doing A Room of One's Own at school. It's almost a bit of auto fiction, My Brilliant Sister. Was there something that you can trace back now and go, that was the start, this was the ignition point for the novel?
Yeah, and it predated that considerably, actually. It's about 10 years ago, actually, if I cast my mind back to when I first picked up a copy of My Brilliant Career. And being from New Zealand, I didn't have any real background knowledge about Miles Franklin. I hadn't studied her at school. I obviously knew her name because of the major writing prizes in the country. And I think I might have seen the Judy Davis and Sam Neill film, or maybe I watched that afterwards. I can't remember the order, but what I do remember is being so gobsmacked by the voice in her book, and just the vivacity and an audacity of Sibylla, this autobiographical narrator, protagonist who's based on Stella Miles Franklin. And so that was what started it. I just was struck by how kind of contemporary the voice felt to me, and also how kind of affected I was by these two sisters in the novel. So on the one hand, you've got Sibylla, who's this rebellious, kind of contrary young woman who doesn't want to marry and is protecting her art at all costs. She wants to be a writer, not a wife. And then she's got this character Gertie, who's the younger sister of Sibylla, who's described as a pretty peacemaker. She's like the mother's favorite, and she ends up marrying the love interest and doing all the right things that a woman in Australia at the turn of the century, to the 19th to 20th century, should have done. And so it almost made me feel like I was seeing caricatures of the two parts of myself at the time, where I was sort of recently married and thinking about whether I was going to keep working in an academic role at a university or do something else, and wanting to write and have no responsibilities, but also wanting to be a good caring person. And I think it was that relationship between those two girls that interested me and led me to going to the Mitchell Library and getting into the archives and seeing whether Gertie was based on a real sister. And that's where I found Linda Franklin, who's the kind of the muse in a way of My Brilliant Sister. She's at the heart of it. So it started with that historical narrative in the middle, and then much later, in 2021, when I finally had more time to write again, I added the kind of bookending contemporary narratives, where I imagined, who might Linda Franklin be in 2021 and who might Stella Franklin be in 2021.
Yeah.
So it kind of grew from there.
Leading back to that, the space that you're in inspires art as well from Virginia Woolf.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly.
Yeah. And so you wrote the bookended sections in the midst of COVID. How did you find that? Because I don't think we've had too many authors where that, I think they've been sort of written just after kind of thing, more than in the midst of it.
Yeah, so I let me see if those years blur into one, but let me go back. 2020, the first real year of it, I was teaching full-time as a secondary school teacher, and being in Melbourne, the lockdown started then. So we had our first surreal experience of leaving the classroom and teaching online. And at the time I had a 3-year-old at home as well, and that was driving me crazy, to be absolutely honest. It was sort of on the cusp of a bit of a breakdown by the end of that year, and I was really fortunate to be in the position where I could talk with my partner and say, I'm I'm not coping with this. I need to take a year to write. Is there any way we can do it? And so we figured it out, and I managed to have a year's unpaid leave from teaching. And so I knew I had just like 11 months really to get it done. So I really kind of relished the time, and it meant that 2021, which was also the worst year of lockdowns for Melbourne, I just felt so fortunate the whole time to, I guess, I love teaching, but to not be teaching via Zoom, and to not be having to balance parenting and teaching, and to have this kind of luxury of time to write without much else to do. So in a way, it was the best possible thing for me at the time. It wasn't, it was stressful, and for a number of reasons. My partner is a doctor, and he was working on the COVID wards at the time, and my family were all in New Zealand, and so there were lots of pressures, but it was writing was a way of dealing with them, I suppose.
And with the ill health that takes place in that section, when I was gently stalking you, I did see that you also had pneumonia. Did that take place during lockdown, or was that more because you'd researched and knew that Linda had pneumonia?
So it was a coincidence, yeah. So I had pneumonia as a child, kind of chronically for a few years, and then it came back in 2018, so before the pandemic, and got quite sick and was hospitalized then, and so that was the time when I was researching, and I was aware of Linda. I'd read My Brilliant Career, and I'd gone into the archives, and I was so one, grateful for penicillin and for the fact that the medical system was able to support me, and so I guess shocked by how painful her death must have been of pneumonia in the early 20th century, 1905, and without any sort of medical assistance. She was only 25 herself, and had a child, her son Teddy, the year before, and hadn't really recovered from the birth, which was quite traumatic, and had acquired pneumonia, and essentially just been getting sicker and sicker for all of her son's life until she died. So incredibly tragic end to her young life. And I think that was partly why I was so drawn to her story too, that strange kind of experience I'd had of, or partial experience of what she'd gone through. Yeah.
And it made me see red when I forget which page it was, but the treatment for it, just stop coughing, and it will get better.
And I just this was in fact, without naming any names, but I did go to a GP when I was in fact a couple of days before I was hospitalized, and he said that, really kind of pleasantly, if you just stop coughing, it'll help you stop coughing. I'm not doing it for fun. I had to put that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. It would have been like, yeah. So you had a fair bit of yourself or your experience in the first part. What about the third part, the part at the end where it's more with the musician, and I loved that bit. But was that you, or was that sort of more?
No, I mean, I think that was me fantasizing in the midst of lockdown and having a kind of experience a bit like Ida at the end of the first section, where she has this sort of strange daydream about what if she had this twin sister, or what if she had been someone else, that kind of sliding doors moment of what if you'd made slightly different decisions in your life. So while Stella in that last section, there's a lot in her life that kind of links to mine. Like the setting itself is where I grew up, and it's sort of, I'm borrowing a lot of things. She's very different to me as an adult, and in fact it was a kind of almost wish fulfillment or fantasy that was kind of cathartic to let play out on the page, because as I was writing, it became clear to me that she herself, there's no perfect way of living, and whatever choices you make mean that you are sacrificing something else, and it's not that any of, I think, these women in the book are kind of despairing or unhappy with their lives, but every choice you make does have consequences, and that's what they're sort of grappling with. And maybe it's sort of advocating for balance. So yes, there are parts of my experience in that last section and things that I've observed, and then there's a lot of fantasizing as well. And there was a lot of kind of reading of interviews with singer-songwriters, and allowing myself an excuse to do a lot of listening to music and listening to interviews and reading interviews and things to try and get into that that voice and that headspace.
Was there a particular musical style that you felt was her voice?
I've deliberately tried to blur that a bit to allow the reader to kind of superimpose her over any of their favorites, perhaps. I do have on Spotify a playlist of things I was listening, sort of, a vibe sheet or whatever you call it, of the potential sounds that she might have had. But I don't think I'll name anyone in particular. I would say, though, there is, I'm sort of dropping hints here all over the place, but there was one artist in particular who's a New Zealander and who has quite an eclectic style. She can sort of a chameleon voice, and that was something I wanted to get across in that section as well, that she wasn't sort of one thing. She was, she could perform in multiple different ways.
And with sorry, it's a bit of an aside, but with what we were saying about how exploring different pathways, we had someone who was with us at Paperbark for a short time who had this amazing opportunity to go and do like this paid internship as a teacher in Tasmania. And when they were leaving, they were, they're really happy about what the adventure they had to look forward to, but they were also saying that they were mourning the life that wasn't going to happen now, even though they didn't regret anything. And I feel like that
exactly
rings true. Yeah. And I liked that you gave the opportunity for the reflection and for the mourning of lives maybe not had without regretting choices made.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was hoping the reader would find, that it's not so much a kind of angsting about what's been lost as reflecting. Yeah.
Yeah. That was definitely the tone throughout the whole novel. Actually, it was very reflective and pondering.
Thank you. That's lovely to hear. I think that's
Now, back on writing, one of the things I absolutely love, I'm sure there's many in the room that do the same. I love seeing what people choose to put in as their epigraphs, sort of that bit right at the start of a book where they might have a quote or a poem or something. And I love finding out, how did you decide on Maggie Nelson?
I was I'm a big fan of Maggie Nelson's. I first read her book The Argonauts a long time ago, which is sort of memoir, autofiction, philosophy. I don't know. It's a lovely mix, and it's about her family. And I think that was one of the first books I'd read that showed me how you can write ethically about your family. So I became really interested in her work from then, and was lucky to meet a friend of hers at a festival in Wellington a long time ago, Brian Blanchfield, who suggested her poetry to me as well. And that's where I found Something Bright Then Holes, which is the collection this poem comes from. And I don't know, it's sort of serendipity or by chance, but I must have been flicking through it again as I was reading, as I was writing, and these lines, the world disappears as it truly is, twinned or twice as deep and large, just seemed perfect to me for what I was hoping to do with the bookend narratives of the contemporary Ida and Stella, who are sort of imaginary twins, and the idea of these lives not lived still possibly existing in some kind of hidden depth or shadow to yourself or something, and that if you explore them, then the world gets a kind of added kind of dimension to it. And I think another reason why I chose it was initially the title of this book was Stillwater, borrowing from the home of Stella Miles Franklin when she was growing up, and there were, as you probably noticed, heaps of images of water throughout the book, and of kind of the reflection of the surface of water and the depth beneath it. And there was something, I think that line that I've got there about the world being twinned and twice as deep and large, if in context, it was about the still water reflecting the world back at itself and sort of doubling it up. So I don't know, it seemed right to me for a number of reasons.
And I've now got the Argonauts and Bluets on order.
Oh, great. Oh, Bluets is so beautiful. That was my lockdown reading as well. It was just, yeah, beautiful books.
Excellent. Great. Well, it was sort of serendipitous. It was in here, and then I just recently finished Art in an Emergency, Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency by Olivia Lang. Yeah. And Maggie Nelson's reference to that too. And I thought, oh, all right, it's a sign. Add to cart. Oh. And so with your background, you have released a number of poetry collections, obviously something that you're interested in, that you immerse yourself in. How did you find the process of writing a novel, and especially an adult fiction novel, compared to writing poetry and academia research?
I mean, it took a lot longer and it was, I think it had different challenges. And I think I don't know if I did it right as such. I don't feel like I wrote it a bit like a poet might have written a novel, when that I'm not terribly sort of interested in a traditional plot structure, and I'm not naturally, going to go for the sort of arc that some novels might have, despite my enjoying reading that sort of yeah, exactly, that beginning, middle, end shape. But I am interested in different ways of structuring or cohering a longer work, and particularly using repetition and symbolism and kind of motifs throughout. And so I think the way that I kind of lace together these three sections of the novel using some repeated words, in fact, and full sentences and chapter titles and images and symbols, that was my way of trying to cohere the sections together a little bit more organically, maybe, to use a bit of a cliche. So I think, I don't know, maybe my next time when I'm working on this next novel, I will do it more like a novelist would. But I think this first sort of attempt, it was more, almost like how I might plan a really long poem, like making my own sort of structure for it. And but I guess the fact is as well that I have always read a lot of fiction. I love novels in particular. So I think borrowing from my favorite novelists and sort of reading to learn from them was a great help as I was transitioning from writing collections of poetry to prose.
And your I'm going to go back to it, the Odor of Sanctity, which was part of your thesis, because that was an extended poem, wasn't it? It was like a long format.
You have done your research, yeah. Thank you.
I tried to order a copy, but it was out of print, I'm afraid.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Get on to them, give them a hard time.
Anyway. It was. So I'd done a wonderfully practical PhD thesis on contemporary epic poetry, where I read a lot of epic poems and then tried to write one myself. And that was, that was long. That was about 240 pages and involved a lot of dramatic monologues and characters. And I think in a way that was a good apprenticeship for writing a novel. It wasn't dissimilar to trying to plan something of that scope. The only difference really was that the lines didn't go to the end of the page. They had line breaks.
Yes. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what was your favorite epic poem when you were doing that research? You don't have to name. But any recommendations?
Sorry?
Any recommendations?
Recommendations. So one that was a great surprise to me is I was reading, the classics, as it were, but then I wanted something more contemporary, and I discovered a Melbourne poet called Pyro, who has recently become a lot better known than he was when I was doing my thesis. At that time, he only had his work published through his own press called Collective Effort Press, but now he's published by Giramondo as well, and is extremely deservedly getting a lot more attention and accolades, because his poem 24 Hours, which is set in the Melbourne suburb of Fitzroy, and as a kind of 740-page almost bricolage or collage of these images of people he's known and seen and streets he's walked down. It's, really similar to my mind to like James Joyce's Ulysses, but more readable, I would say. So I think has that same kind of like immediacy, and it just feels very attached to place. Like Ulysses is set in one day in Dublin, 24 Hours is set in one day in Melbourne, and I don't know, I wasn't expecting to love it. I was just sort of, trying to find something, and it just struck me, and I've been a little bit obsessed with his work since then.
Did you say 745 pages though?
Yeah, 740 pages.
740.
Yeah.
Wow. It's the same size as Ulysses,
and he
isn't it?
typewrote it all as well. Yeah, very, very long, but yeah, kind of genius, I think.
And when you were writing this one, as we were saying, where it doesn't feel like it had maybe a stock standard narrative arc of conflict resolution sort of thing, it was more of a circle. Would you say that is something that you would be looking to write again? You were saying that you might branch out, but is that something that felt like home to you with your background?
The circle shape, do you mean, or the like? What's the
Yeah.
yeah?
Sort of subverting that conventional narrative structure.
Yeah, totally. I think that's I think I'm not suspicious of it. I feel like I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I can. I'm interested in easy resolutions, and it sort of feels more honest to me, or satisfying to try and avoid them where I can. Like initially, I had almost a circle, but more of a figure eight shape in mind when I was imagining how the book would work, and was trying my best to kind of not have a hierarchy between the first section and the last one. I did that for a long time. I wasn't sure which one should come first, and so I wanted them to be kind of equally weighted in a sense. I'd even toyed with the idea of like printing half the book upside down so you didn't know which way to start, but no publisher would go along with that. So but I think that kind of thing, that kind of evading a definite resolution, is something I'm just curious about or interested in. I think life is often a lot more complex than those shapes we impose on them.
Yeah. And I always like to imagine characters in a novel, that they don't just end when I close the book and read the last page. I like to imagine them continuing on. And I feel like with those sorts of endings, you and oh wow, you are enabled so much more in allowing that vision as well.
Yeah,
Did
absolutely.
you
I
ever
like to
revisit?
let the reader. Sorry,
you go on. You go on.
I just agreeing with you really, and I think it's nice to leave a reader space to speculate and to involve themselves in the narrative as much as you can.
And would you revisit these characters?
Not these ones, I don't think, no, but versions of them maybe. I think like different iterations, or I don't know. Yeah, that's a really good question, but I think maybe only insofar as I'll always be interested in kind of curious female characters and women at different stages of their life, and relationships, particularly between mothers and daughters. So that kind of thing I'll be keen to keep writing about. But these ones I think are going to stay in this book.
Yeah. And with motherhood, I think it's one of those things that it's so much more complicated and complex than perhaps some people perceive it as. I'm not a mother. I applaud mothers because I don't know how you do it all. And I did really enjoy that you presented the different ways and the different choices that motherhood, forces women to make. Can you expand upon sort of how much of that maybe was autofiction? How much was your experience? Which would, yeah. I hope that made sense, that question.
Totally, yeah, absolutely, and thank you. I'm really pleased that that's what you got from the book, and I think I owe a great deal, a debt of gratitude to a close friend of mine who's also a writer, and we have a kind of ongoing correspondence because we've often lived in different countries, but we write to each other a lot. And it all started a few years ago when she was kind of considering whether she wanted to have a baby or not, and so we're sort of talking about it on each side of the motherhood divide, as she said so beautifully. And I think in a way, you asked if Stella in the last section was based on me. It's probably more based on her than anyone else, and I know in reality. And I think having those conversations with her helped me kind of work out how I wanted to present my own experiences of motherhood in the book, and also how I wanted to present, other experiences of being a woman without having a child or being a mother. But in terms of the first section, Ida's section, which is certainly auto-fictional, it's not me, and there are, I've definitely taken liberties and fictionalized where the story needs that to happen, but many of the details regarding Asta, her daughter, are based on the interaction with my son or with what I've observed from my friends and their children, because I think I just tend to write what I'm surrounded, write about what I'm surrounded by, and I've been lucky to have lots of children around me for the last few years.
And with the character of Anna, how would you say her name? Sorry.
I'm imagining Anna. That's fine, yeah. Anna.
Yeah, Anna. Yeah. So towards the end of the novel, I really liked where you had got it written down here. Of course, she'd expected it to be hard. The difference, she told me, between expectation and the reality that follows is the difference between a shadow and what casts it. I loved that. Was that the sort of dialogue that you had with friends and things like that? Was the experience of it's more than what you expect it to be?
Yeah, absolutely. That was in fact that came from almost plagiarized myself here, because I've got a verse novel called Neon Days that I wrote in the first few months of having a baby, and that image came to me then, because I was just scribbling kind of manically each day in a diary, and while I was breastfeeding and sleep deprived, and that was one of the things that came out of that. And I think it had come from a conversation with a friend who who didn't have children and still doesn't have children, who had, like, glibly, without any ill intent whatsoever, and very lovingly sort of said, "I can't believe you didn't realize how hard it was going to be." This is when I was really kind of broken, and I was I think that was when it came out, and it just stuck with me as, I don't know, without wanting to sort of be that kind of, I don't know, unhelpful kind of person with a child who assumes no one else understands. And it's not like a moral high ground at all. It's just the fact of like lots of parts of life that are sort of universal but also very personal. It's hard to explain what you're feeling in them until someone else has experienced it, I think. And so yeah, that, I don't know, just rambled for a few minutes and ruined that lovely quote that you just read out so
That
kindly.
friend just has to go stand in the corner with the GP who told you to stop coughing.
Yeah, precisely, yeah.
They can hash it out.
No, we're friends.
Yeah, oh, good. You were able to get past that.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of what you write is drawn from your life. You also have mentioned being able to research. Do you enjoy the research process, diving through the historical?
I do. Yeah, I love it. I really frustrated historian. I haven't trained as one, but I have always, I guess in a amateur way, loved getting into primary sources, and I just get excited by things like having to decipher copperplate handwriting, or finding one of the letters that I found when I was trying to find correspondence between Stella and Linda Franklin was a note that Linda posted to Stella that had little scribbles on it by her, must have been sort of less than 1 year old son, who had taken the pen, and that little glimpse of somebody's life there. I just find yeah, so fascinating and inspiring, and yeah, so I think, yeah, without saying too much, it's something I definitely want to continue doing in the next book, and it's something that was a big part of the Odor of Sanctity as well, which involved a lot of historical research.
And I imagine you meet some amazing people that way as well, the people who are passionate about preserving and
Oh my
making sure
goodness.
that history is available.
Yeah, I adore librarians and booksellers and archivists and anyone who is dealing with yeah, with primary sources and resources. And I think it's such a valuable and probably sort of underestimated role that society needs. I was lucky to do a reading at the Mitchell Library promoting the book, and I hadn't been back there since I'd gone to the archives, so it felt quite special being back at the library where that sort of seed had been planted for me.
And did you have sort of interactions with the librarians and the archivists? Had you had much help when you were doing the research, or I don't
Not
actually
too
really
much,
know how it works.
It was yeah, well, no, I know how it worked for me. I don't know if it's the right way, but no, I had, yeah, emailed them in advance and said what I was doing and what I would like, and they had prepared for me a kind of dossier, or like made available to me the Franklin family archives, and allowed me space and time and quiet to just look through them at my leisure, which just felt like a huge privilege. And I think it's another great benefit of public libraries that you can do that. So, and I would never have known where to find them without the help of yeah, of archivists.
And is it digitized, or were you able to, put on some white gloves and leaf through the actual letters?
Good question. There was a bit of both. There were some that were digitized that I was able to access outside of the library, and then there were some actual hard copies as well. So it was casting my mind back. It feels like a long time ago now, but it was, I mean, make it sound like I had loads of time, but it was in the summer school holidays, and it was a few days where I left my son with his grandparents in Sydney, my parents-in-law, and went into the city each day for 3 days to just spend sort of 8 hours in the library, just cramming as much in as I could. So it was a flying visit, but a really valuable one for the book.
Yeah. Now, this is going to be a contentious question, but do you have a favorite? Which sister do you prefer?
Ooh. I can't know. That's unfair.
It's not fair, is it?
No. Look, it's all in the moment. Like sometimes each of them is sort of insufferable, and sometimes each of them is just like a beautiful, inspiring person. And I think that's why I was so drawn to them in the first place, is that they, are fascinatingly different and yet similar. And I think that process of trying to trace back where their paths diverged, that Linda's trying to do in her sort of last days of her life, as she's imagining this kind of novel and letters written back to her sister. I guess they're just so intertwined to me. I couldn't separate them out really. Yeah.
And do you feel like the personalities that you were reading, or the people that you were envisioning when you were reading the letters, were they pretty in line with how you had perceived the personalities from reading My Brilliant Career?
It's a really good question. I think in a way Linda was more assertive and feminist and interesting than Gertie is in the novel, which is possibly understandable given that Stella was 16 or 17 when she was writing My Brilliant Career, and has this sort of sibling rivalry with her sister at the time. She is, as Linda says in a letter back to her, pretty hot on her in places, meaning pretty unflattering. I think she does reduce Gertie, the sort of fictionalized Linda, to this kind of, slightly bland and dull sort of version of femininity, whereas while Linda is definitely more dutiful and conventional, there are like there's evidence of her being having a bit more of a spine and a bit more kind of interest than I think she's given in my brilliant career.
Yeah, a perception of her as potentially not true to who she really was.
Precisely, yeah, that's right. I think any fictionalized version of anyone is going to be partial and not complete is the other thing I'd say. And I think probably it's just the
Bias.
famous Stella is a kind of caricature of Stella as well. Stella's a lot more balanced and sort of nuanced than Sibylla is,
Yeah.
I think.
And so we've got two massive characters there, both in real life and in your novel. Were there any characters that got the chop? We do love talking about killing your darlings. Is there characters or scenes, something that you are able to talk about that you had to cut out for the narrative's sake?
So many. It's sort of embarrassing to say, but when it was initially submitted to the publisher and it was nearly twice as long as it is
Wow.
here. It was so there was a lot of chopping. The editing process was extraordinary, and I mean that in a good way. I felt really incredibly lucky to have a wonderful editor to help me sort of sculpt it into what it is now. And I was at the time, it's always hard to imagine what you've been working on for so long changing again, or but they were right, I think, and I think it's a better book for having been kind of pruned back, and a lot of the pruning was done from the first section actually, which in the earlier draft was a lot longer and a lot more auto and less fiction, if you know what I mean. It was a lot rawer as well, and I think just reading back over it, it wasn't balancing with the rest of the novel. It was sort of it wanted to be a different thing. So in fact, quite late in the piece, I ended up scrapping it completely and rewriting it from scratch. So, and I think the process of having written the first draft was crucial, because I wouldn't have been able to rewrite a second draft nearly so quickly without having gone through that. But also, there was a lot lost from that, and that was a learning curve for me.
Yeah, you'd done the marathon training, so you were able to run the marathon for the second one.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a nice analogy.
And with that process of editing, it's always a bit of a hard question, but how long did that take? Was it months, years? What sort of deadline were you on? How did that sort of look?
Well, I guess there are lots of drafts. So I'd thought I'd edited it really thoroughly when I submitted it for the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards, and I thought that's it. That's pretty much what's going to be published. But then went to the publisher and went to the editor, and that was another definitely months. The best part of a year of working together on different iterations and versions and polishing it. And I think it was really valuable, not just to the finished product, but also for me kind of psychologically helping it get out into the world, because it felt like it was more of a team effort, I suppose, rather than just something that I was solely responsible for. And so it made it slightly less terrifying to know it was going to be on the shelf and in people's hands. And it also just made me acutely aware of how writing a novel and making most artworks involves a lot of people. It's not that myth of the genius doing it all by herself or himself is just that, a myth, I think. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's something that gets forgotten about, is that it really does take the whole community to collaborate together to put out a successful novel.
Definitely. And that was certainly something I learned in the process of writing this one. And I hope it kind of comes across in particularly the first section as well, which has, it's definitely not a straight retelling of what happened, but it does involve some aspects of my life.
Well, I felt it was the perfect amount as well. It wasn't like you were reading and going, no, there's something missing here. So what I would like to do next, if that's all right, is open up to questions from the audience, see if we've got anyone in the audience. We'll have a little roving mic so that recording will pick up their voice, and I will repeat their question so that you can hear that. And then what we'll do is we'll ask you to read out a passage for us, if that's okay as well.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Any questions from our lovely audience? Don't be shy. Anna Maria?
Sort of went through a lot of the ideas of how the book came together. One of the things that I noticed when I started to read it, and I didn't get it till I was onto the last character, the very subtle nuances that were happening that were potentially connecting. And it reminded me of Michael Cunningham's book, The Hours, back in 1998, when he wrote about Virginia Woolf, which was a character of one of his segments and then other characters kind of intertwined. Now that book became a film. So I am hoping that this book gave me the same feeling that The Hours did. And I might just send an email to Nicole Kidman to say potentially one of these characters could be you. It's probably not a question, but it's I found the styles quite similar and I thoroughly enjoyed your book. Thank you. There are so many segments that I highlighted, including that one segment that has already been mentioned. There is one thing that you say about Anna where I could have read Girlfriend instead of Tessa the D'Urberville. Was that you? Are you a Tessa the D'Urberville girl rather than Girlfriend? Because I grew up on Dolly.
I had sort of surreptitious copies of Girlfriend magazine in my room smuggled in. My parents took a dim view of that, but I also had Tessa the D'Urberville. I was, you know, had eclectic tastes, bit of everything, balance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks.
You in the first section, I don't know if you're doing. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Was it a device? And I'm wondering why Ada's husband was forever he or my he. I found very strange. Seemed quite supportive to her, and he was never named. Just something I noticed as I was reading, and I wondered if you had a purpose in that.
That's very astute of you, very observant. It was a conversation I ended up having with the editor about initially in that first section, a number of characters weren't named. It wasn't entirely deliberate. I think it was just the way it was coming out, possibly because it was auto-fictional and it felt, you know, you don't necessarily name people in a diary entry type scenario. But then as it changed, it seemed, yeah, inappropriate and confusing not to have names. But he was the last one, to not be given a name, and we decided to leave it at that because, I mean, in part, at times it had the effect of showing the slight chilliness in their relationship, the fact that there was a distance despite the proximity of their lives together in lockdown. There was, you know, a waning of intimacy, but also in part to make him a sort of everyman, and that he, you know, my he, you're right, that's an odd phrase, but I suppose that's what she was viewing him as at that point in her life, not not any sort of endearments or affectionate terms, but aware that he had that particular role in her life. And then I think a number of readers I've spoken to since the book has come out have, if not related completely, at least found some resonances with their own experience. Like, oh, that's a bit like he or my husband. And I think that was what the editor in particular was suggesting would be relevant about leaving him unnamed, to kind of make him a little bit of an archetype rather than a specific individual character. But yeah, it's well spotted.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. So we've just had the question, what's next? What's coming next for you?
I have started something, but it's in the very, very early stages, and to the extent that I don't know exactly what shape it will be eventually. And I've just, in fact, met with my agent this afternoon. I've decided to try and push back my delivery date for this next manuscript because it's taking longer than expected already. But what I can say, I think confidently, it will still be about whenever it gets eventually written, is mother-daughter relationships again, but this time between a mother and a teenage daughter, because as I mentioned, I'm a secondary teacher as well, and I spend most of my days with teenagers, and I'm fascinated by what it's like to be a teenager today, and also what it must be like to parent one. I think something that's, my son isn't a teenager yet, but it's on my mind. And as a teacher, I've worked in both a private school and public schools, and I'm curious about the distinctions between them, and the culture in Australia of private education being a lot more common than in New Zealand where I grew up. So it's going to involve schools and parent teenage child relationships, and it will have an historical thread as well, but how much, or how literal that historical thread will be, I'm yet to decide. So I think that's probably all I can say at the moment without jinxing it.
Thank you. All right. Is anyone else? I think that might be it for now. So yeah, did you have a passage in mind you'd like to read to us? I had a whole page of quotes. I don't know if you saw that.
I did actually. I was glad I scrolled down because I noticed you said that you like page 197, and I haven't read that before, but it's one that I like as well. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd really like to read that one.
I would love you to.
Is it page about right?
Thank you. That would be amazing.
Okay, sure. So this is from the third section where Stella, the singer-songwriter, goes on a kind of mad skinny dip or swim in the sea and gets caught in a rip, essentially. Should just say, is incidentally, of all of the passages in the novel that she might assume, my mother, when she read this, was like, was that real? And I'm like, no, Mum, that was not real. Lots of other things, but this did not happen. Anyway.
Did you also have a cold immersion existential crisis?
No, exactly. Where should I start? Maybe I swim with strength towards the shore, but feel sure that I'm being carried away. You've got me, I say to the ocean. That's okay. You can have me for now. I float on my back, relax my jaw, try not to shiver. I listen to the sky, which speaks the sea's grey language. A wave will come soon and take me where I must go. I laugh at the thought of that, and salt splutters at the back of my throat. I face the horizon, treading water, and see a flat rolling swell that stirs rather than sends me anywhere. I turn and look for the batch, which is fox terrier sized now and waiting obediently. Float supine again and look at my long toes like E.T.'s fingers, flecks of black polish on the nails. Clouds are flying fast above shadows and the fist of water that's got me. There's a silhouette of a walker or two on the beach and perhaps a dog. I could yell. I choose not to. Some people flip coins to make decisions. Others read the stars. Others pray. Others reason. This is what it is to be at sea. This is what it is to be in love. This is what it is to write a song. This is what it is to be alive. I'm freezing. But that is the sort of thought John Cage wouldn't countenance, so I try not to either. This part of the universe that is me, not a self, just a portion of the whole, is cold, very cold, stupid too, very stupid. If it's washed back to shore, then it will improve in every sense. It is not praying. No, it isn't praying. It's just thinking, considering, setting an intention, shivering. Now it's drifting closer to where it wants to be. Now it's carried up like a raft on the giant ringlet of the wave that suddenly appeared. Now it's thrashing the ice out of its limbs, paddling and kicking to propel itself, numbly edgeless, and is shot to the sand, only 50 meters or so to the north of the batch. Elation. But I must sit for a minute, must nod to the dog walker who asks if I'm all right. Where's your towel? Back at the batch. Don't worry, I live just there.
I love it. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
That was brilliant. Thank you. I can't believe your mum asked if that was real.
No.
You're like, I promise, Mum, I only skinny dip where I'm not going to get caught.
Exactly, no rips, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much for joining us virtually. That's one thing the pandemic gave us. Comfortable,
Indeed.
Zoom. It was such a joy to have you. yeah, thank you so much for the book, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for your wonderful questions and reading. It's just, yeah, lovely to hear from you. So thank you. Have a great night, everyone.